The GPU market at this moment is still far from what it used to be, but there are signs that things should slowly get back to normal. Prices for the first time in months have started dropping instead of rising and are getting closer to something one might call reasonable. Is it the right time to buy a new card? Well, probably not, but if you have no other choice and are on a budget, there is one card that could help you get through tough times, the GTX 1660 Ti. How's it going, everyone? I'm Lazark, and in today's video we're going to answer a question whether 1660 Ti, the model from Gigabyte that I have here, is still good value in 2020. I've tested the card in a couple of games, single player and multiplayer, to see how it performs. If you don't know, this card is basically a 2060 without the DLSS and ray tracing. It's also a bit slower, you get around 10% less FPS than you would with a 2060. It has 6 GB of GDDR6 memory. It runs at 1770 MHz core clocks and 12,000 MHz memory clock. The power consumption is at a very acceptable 85 watts and the recommended PSU is at 450 watts. Now, the good thing about the 1660 Ti, especially when compared to the 2060 and higher models, is its availability. The 1660 Ti is available at a much more affordable price of around $350–400, and if you're lucky you can get it even for less on sale, while the 2060 costs still well over $600, sometimes even $700, which makes it a very bad choice to purchase, especially right now where we see the prices of 3060, especially here in Europe, dropping as low as $600–700. But what exactly are you getting for $400? Let's find out. First, let's see how the card handles Assassin's Creed Valhalla. At 1080p and highest settings, the game falls just under 60 FPS, averaging at 53. But what's really worrying is that 0.1% low is only at 19 FPS. Reducing the settings one step down will give you an average of 58 FPS with 0.1% low at 39 FPS, which should give you a pretty comfortable experience while playing. Dropping the settings one step down to high increases the average FPS to 61 and lowers 0.1% to 41. What about 1440p? Well, at the same settings as before, so high, we get average of 46 FPS and the 0.1% is at 34. While this is playable and acceptable in a single player game, it just shows you that you shouldn't expect a great 1440p performance unless you're okay with very low graphics settings. Second, we have Red Dead Redemption 2. At 1080p and ultra settings, the average FPS is at 48, while the 0.1% lowest is at 37. So again, completely playable, but not the smoothest experience. If you decide to lower the settings to balanced, the overall FPS improves. Average is at 63, while 0.1% lowest is at 45. Bumping up the resolution to 1440p will give you roughly 42 average FPS and 30 on the 0.1% lowest mark. Next, we have Cyberpunk 2077. At ultra settings, the average FPS is at 44 and the 0.1% lowest at 31. Lowering the settings to high gives you an average of 59 FPS and 0.1% lowest at 47. If you reduce the settings further and go to medium, the average FPS count is at 68 and the 0.1% low at 53.6, which means you will get a really smooth experience. Bumping the resolution up to 1440p and medium settings gives you an average of 45 FPS and 40 at 0.1% low. Let's move on to some multiplayer games. I've tested the card in Warzone and Apex Legends. In Warzone, playing at 1080p and high settings gets you 68 FPS average and 45 in the 0.1% low bracket. If you reduce the settings to medium, you will get roughly 85 FPS average and 32 on the 0.1% low. Lowering it down even further increases the average FPS to 92 and 0.1% low to 45. In Apex, the situation is much better as the game is less graphically demanding. At 1080p high settings, we get an average of 110 FPS with 0.1% low at 75, and if you want to play at higher resolution, this is also completely doable with average FPS at 74 and 0.1 low at 52. Now you can obviously increase the FPS count by reducing the overall game settings, lighting shadow to a lower value, then you should be good with around 144 FPS at 1080p. Finally, Unigine Heaven score. At 1080p max settings we get average of 79 FPS with 36 minimum and a score of 1991. At 1440p, the score is at 1185, average FPS at 47 and minimum at just 25. So what's the conclusion? Well, I hope nobody expected like super performance from this GPU, but because this is not this bracket, this is not top end, this is last generation GPU, mainstream GPU, I guess, for people on a rather strict budget. But if you're looking for something to play at 1080p and you're not expecting it to run at over 60 FPS on high and highest settings, then this card is completely fine. And if you're looking for something to play multiplayer games like Warzone, Apex Legends, or even Valorant or CSGO, this card is completely fine. You should probably, in some of those titles, you will get well above 100 FPS, especially if you reduce the settings down. So it's a very good alternative for the current very highly priced 3060, 3070 and so on. There is just one thing you should take into consideration, and it's obviously the price. Now, I don't suggest picking up the card at the normal, let's say, retail price of around $600 because it's just too much for the performance you're getting. But since we already saw that prices are dropping and shops are more likely to sell the lower gen or last gen cards at a lower price, picking it up at around $350, $400 after tax is, I think, a good choice at this moment, and it should give you a good playing experience and allow you to wait for the prices to drop even further to pick up something that will be more future-proof. If you're curious about how the 1660 Ti stacks up against RTX 3050, then remember to subscribe to stay notified because this is something I will look into in the next video. Meanwhile, thank you very much for watching. I'm Laser and I'll see you soon.